to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I'm your host for this season, Chris Taylor, also known as Raka. This is going to be season 34, and this is going to be a deep dive into everything Octagram. So first and foremost, what is Octagram? Octagram is the nurtural impact or the nurtural effect on a person's type through the four sides of the mind with temple influence involved. So it is a deeper understanding of shadow development or subconscious development, shadow focus or subconscious focus. Those of you that were waiting for season 33 for so as long as you guys have been, this is why. Welcome to the season that is the reason why that has been delayed for as long as it has. Back when we started to do season 33, we were just getting into our understanding of what temples were as a whole. And as we kind of uncovered more and more, we realized that you really can't have a great season 33 cognitive growth tracking without understanding the temple influence side of things and understanding better the nurture that comes with integrating the four sides of the mind as far as the temples are concerned. Now, to give everybody a refresher course that may be seeing this for the first time, or maybe you aren't fully caught up on all the information in Journeyman, what are the temples? So before we had the temples, we still had four sides of the mind developed. We still had a concept of you could be subconscious developed or shadow developed. And at the time, what we understood that as was being more in tune with that side of the mind from a pure function standpoint. And while that isn't less true today, now that we have the temples, it's a far greater understanding. So what are they? Well, we started to take a look at, okay, we have these four types that always share the same four sides of the mind. We have four sets of those. If they are all sharing the same four sides of the mind, like ENFP, ISTJ, ESTP, INFJ, then there has to be commonalities that all of these share, a creed or a general philosophy that these types tend to follow, more so than the other types, just by virtue of having the same shared four sides of the mind. And from there, the temples were kind of birthed. After a lot of studying and after a lot of looking into the types that we understood to be their types, we started to see a pattern emerge between each of these, what we later called temples. These temples were called that because they are general philosophies of what each of these types kind of almost worship from a standpoint of a philosophy. So, for example, the aforementioned types, the ENFP, ISTJ, ESTP, and INFJ, all showed a really high focus on character, on almost a spiritual who somebody is at the end of the day. And that's where we ended up with the soul temple. And we can get into kind of the components of like how each origin, which we'll get into here shortly, goes into that overarching theme of the temple. But in a short suite to put a bow on it, the temples are a thematic understanding of these four types sharing one space. At the same time, these temples are all four core components of what it is to have the human experience. You have a soul, a sense of identity, who people are, who you are. You have a mind, an ability to learn and understand and wield knowledge. You have a heart, you have passion, the fire of desire to improve, and you have a focus on legacy, what you leave behind for the next, who in your life will remember you. For some types, these different core components become more important at different phases of life. And that's another kind of pattern of understanding when it comes to humans, depending on which temple you are, depending on whether you're focused or developed into another one of these temples that are influencing your temple, is going to determine to a degree which one of these 4 core tenets of the human experience is most relevant to you at what point in time. Now, from these temples, we realize that, okay, well, in each temple there are 2 quadras, right? Soul Temple, for example, is Templars and philosophers, right? And so is Mind Temple. So when you end up with temple meeting quadra, you end up with these dyads. In other words, a dyad is just an ENFP and an ISTJ, subconscious variants of each other. So all of these subconscious pairings are what we're referring to as dyads. And so they exist within the same temple, but they also share the same functions. Because of this, they end up having the same origins. Now, these origins are, at the end of the day, this root thing that this craving, so to speak, a need in the side of the mind that when we were first looking at it, we saw as superseding type. What we realized is that these origins are coming through via the hero function. And as we get more information out there, you guys will get more and more chances to have a deeper understanding of how these origins actually attach to every single function, because there is an origin function stack. But at the end of the day, you have ENFPs, ISTJs. Both of those origins are looking at justification, as an example. How is this all relevant to Octagram? So at the center here, you have your origin, right? Now, going back to what we were talking about how every human being encompasses an aspect of each temple. What we realized is that while somebody can't exit their temple fully, obviously you are still within the 4 sides of your mind. No matter how you try to transition, you still have that same structure in place. So you're never leaving the temple. But we know for a fact that humans are incorporating these other aspects of these other temples as well. What we started to realize is that these other temples were having influence on the different sides of the mind. So no matter where you're transitioning, if you are a soul temple, the mind temple is influencing your subconscious. So the difference between an ISTJ ego and an ENFP aspiring to be an ISTJ is that ISTJ side is going to be far more focused on education, far more focused on information, knowledge, power, things of that nature. Whereas the ISTJ, if they are shadow focused, for example, or if they're not subconscious focused, their ego is going to be more soul temple. So it's an ISTJ that is soul temple, and then their shadow is flavored by the heart temple, so on and so forth. And so when we were going through and looking at all these things together, we started to realize where the placement of all of these temples were and how these other temples were, which side of the mind they were influencing. For example, the living virtue of any origin is attached to the ego temple itself. It is what the temple itself is trying to aspire to be. It's what it claims to be. And so with that, you have the ego temple influencing that pole. If you have any kind of temple or thematic creed or anything like that, there are going to be things that are the peak of what this idea or philosophy is trying to do. And that's what the living virtue is trying to be. For the justification types, my types, absolution. Oh, well, you can be absolved of your guilt because it's part of character development. It's part of your growth. It's part of who you are. And so, as you see, soul temple, who you are, is influencing that temple, right? It's influencing itself. It is involved in itself. And that is attached to subconscious focus. On the other side, we have the deadly sin. And for my type, it's wrath, right? And wrath is kind of the opposite in a way to absolution. It is punitive. It is, you are going to suffer because of X, Y, or Z. It's going from, yeah, mistakes happen, it's fine, it's part of growth, to screw you for those mistakes, oftentimes because they've impacted either the ENFP or ISTJ personally and directly. And so that absolution goes out the window. And just like the ego to the superego, where they're vying for control, so too these focuses are vying for control. And so too is the superego temple trying to supersede the ego temple. So in the soul temple's case, this is the body temple. Wrath being a physical destruction of property or someone, or leaving a lasting scar that the person can never forget. Leaving a mark on their legacy. On the other side, we have the development. Now, for my temple, the shadow development pole would be the shadow temple influence. And for my type, that ends up being favoritism, which is a change. We did have discrimination there. What we realized is it's closer to being favoritism. We'll get into that with time. But favoritism, heart temple influence, right? For my type. Essentially, being closer to that heart temple, there are going to be things or people that I am more specifically passionate about, that I am showing favor to. On the other side, we have the subdevelopment. That is the subtemple influence for my temple. That would be the mind temple influence. And that's impartiality. So as you see here, each one of these origins are the ways that we're trying to fulfill the need of the apex of our mind first and foremost. It is, at the end of the day, the core desire, so to speak, of each of these dyads. Whether ENFP or ISTJ, the origin remains the same. One is external with it, one is internal with it. And so this is what the octagram essentially unravels to be. It is a study of people's nurture from a thematic standpoint of the temples, and a explanation of one of the most innate desires to us, since the hero function is one of the first functions to develop in a person's psyche. This is how these poles, as they're called, are how every aspect of humanity exists within a person from a thematic standpoint. As we go on, we'll talk more about what the development is, what the influence, or what the development and the focus are. We'll go more in depth in the next episodes. And then after that, we are going to be going into each of the 16 types. Each of the 8 dyads. If you have any questions about this, other than when is season 33 coming back, give it time. We got to get through this stuff first. There's a few things we have to do to get everybody caught up to speed, because we can't have a season 33 without understanding Octagram. From there, we're going to be going into, I'm going to be producing a video that outlines and catches everybody up, all the way from cognitive functions, all the way up to the temples themselves. And then obviously this season carries on from there. Once we get everybody caught up to speed, we can start going back into season 33 and looking at, now that the dust with temples is starting to settle, we can actually get back to cognitive growth tracking. But a few seasons to go through, a few things to get out of the way first. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. You can always reach me on Discord. Like the video, subscribe, get on the Discord, make sure you're there. There's a lot of good resources on there. You can always reach me there. You can always reach me here on the comments as well. Anyway, guys, I'll catch you guys in the next episode. These episodes are probably going to be a lot beefier than this 15-minute intro, but I just wanted to get everybody's understanding up to snuff on this. Have a good night.